Hi everyone, I'm Ellie from Ellie's Exotics, and are you looking for a gecko that doesn't take up a lot of floor space in your house, but you'd rather than take up height? Well, today we're going to be talking about 4 different species of arboreal geckos, and they come from New Caledonia. So what does arboreal mean? An arboreal gecko is a gecko that likes to climb rather than crawl along the floor. The only time I see my geckos on the floor is when they are hunting their isopods. Each gecko is going to get 5 pros and 5 cons, but we're going to start out with talking about some general pros and cons for all 4 of these species. New Caledonian geckos generally have very similar care, it's just some are bigger than others. So let's go through the general pros and cons first that would suit each of these species. Pro number 1 is that they like temperate conditions. Some like it warmer than others, but if you come from a hot country, you most likely won't need a heat source. But if you are from the UK, I highly recommend having a heat source for your New Caledonian geckos, just because it gets so cold during winter, and a cold gecko means a gecko that is less willing to eat. Pro number 2 is what I've kind of already spoke about, is that these guys take up vertical space rather than horizontal space. They are a perfect pet if you're living in an apartment, or you want to keep them in your bedroom or another small space. It's very easy to find a place to put the enclosure, and it's quite easy to go above and beyond the minimum because generally that includes just adding more height. And the last general pro is that these geckos love to eat a fruit powder and water mix, which is very easy to make and readily available. The powder formula is why a lot of people go for New Caledonian geckos, but remember, you should still be offering them bugs. I've got some geckos that won't eat any bugs, they are not fussed, but some of them go crazy for them. And when they started eating bugs, they grew so quickly, like exponentially. So definitely do offer bugs at least once a week. So now let's talk about the general cons for all of these species. They can all drop their tail. A lot of geckos can. And it can be quite stressful for not just the gecko, but also for you as the owner when they do drop it. Some grow them back, some don't, which we're going to talk about today. Another con, pretty much every gecko on this list has the potential to be a very skittish animal. I personally am a snake girly because I find it easier to tame down a skittish snake than it is to tame down a skittish gecko. I've had Cheese since he was 4 grams. I've done plenty of handling routines with him and he has never gotten better. I know that he's generally always going to be quite a skittish gecko, and that's okay. And con number 3. All of these geckos require quite high humidity, which means, I have one right now that I hate. A wooden enclosure isn't really going to work very well for them, so you're going to have to go for either glass or PVC. Both of those are very expensive, and when you start to get into the bigger species, which we'll talk about later, that is an incredibly expensive enclosure compared to if you were to go for a leopard gecko, for example. You can keep them in a wooden vivarium, which don't cost as much. So if you're worried about cost, I will say New Caledonian geckos can be a bit more expensive to set up than literally any other gecko species. But I've spoke a bit about crested geckos, let's get into their pros and cons. Crested geckos are probably one of, if not the most popular pet gecko in the reptile community. And for good reason, they are adorable, they've got plenty of character and personality, and pro number 1, they can handle mistakes very well. Now obviously you should do your research before bringing home any animal. Make sure that you are trying to limit making mistakes, but if something were to go wrong for whatever reason, like your humidity is a little bit too low at first or a little bit too high, crested geckos will be able to handle that. Another huge pro about crested geckos is there is plenty of documentation about their natural habitat. This is such a huge pro, if not the biggest pro for me, because it means that we can very easily recreate that habitat and give them the best enclosure possible. Exotic Keeper magazine did a full YouTube video about crested geckos in the wild. I highly recommend that you go and watch that if you haven't already. And they talk about the seasons of New Caledonia, the temperatures, humidity, everything. It is brilliant. And when it's coming from the home of the crested gecko, you know you can trust it. Number 3, these guys are readily available. They're everywhere. You can find a crested gecko in pretty much any reptile shop. Actually, without a doubt, you will find a crested gecko in a reptile shop. But my go-to when I'm getting a new animal is get them from a rescue. Cheese was given to me for free. He wasn't from a rescue, but he was from a breeder. There's plenty of geckos that need homes out there, so definitely have a look on rehoming sites, your local RSPCA or equivalent, or even your local small reptile rescues. Pro number 4, they come in lots and lots of different colors and patterns and morphs. Because there are plenty of people breeding them, that means there's plenty of breeders out there who are testing the waters with things like coloration or, striking patterns. Some of my favorites are Dalmatian crested geckos and, of course, the Xanthic crested gecko. And pro number 5 is crested geckos are the perfect medium-sized gecko. Out of every gecko on this list, I think as an adult, they are the best to handle. They're not too big so that their claws are really sharp, but they're not too small so that they're really fragile. But now let's get into the cons. Con number 1, which is something I experience with Cheese regularly, is jump first and then think later. I do think that all crested geckos collectively share one brain cell. They aren't the smartest. And con number 2, if they jump and something startles them, if they drop that tail is gone for good. They are the only species on this list that if they drop their tail, that's it. It's gone. It's not coming back. And did you know, which is con number 3, that females and males can actually act slightly differently. I have had multiple of both. I've raised them from babies to adults, and males specifically do go through a hormonal phase that sometimes never really ends. So this is something to consider if you're thinking about choosing a male or a female. Females will generally be a little bit more chilled out until they start laying eggs. So that's a whole other thing. Con number 4 is, out of all the geckos on this list, I do think they are probably the least interactive out of all of them. I don't really think Cheese knows who I am compared to some of the other geckos, so that can make it harder to build a bond with them compared to some more intelligent geckos. And con number 5 is that crested geckos are pretty much purely nocturnal. You're going to see them at nighttime, not during the day, but there are some other geckos on this list that you will see during the day quite a bit more. So let's get on to the next gecko. And this gecko is Honey, my Gargoyle Gecko. Now, Honey can be a little bit spicy. She's got a bit of attitude to her, but she generally sits quite still. So she'd rather put up a fight than run away. But let's talk about some pros and cons of owning a Gargoyle Gecko. My number 1 pros has to be their coloration. I mean, Honey is just stunning. She is beautiful. This is her fired up, and then when she's fired down, she still has those bright red stripes, but she's also white. So she's white and red. She's stunning. And you don't really see many of these bright red colors in any of the other New Caledonian geckos. Pro number 2 is that these guys can actually regrow their tails. So if she were to get spooked and drop it, then she would get a brand new one. Now that tail might not look the same as it did before, but it's still nice to know that they won't be without a tail. Number 3 applies to every gargoyle other than Honey, and that's that these guys love their bugs. They love a good insect, which can be very fun to watch when you're feeding these guys. I think Cheese and Honey decided to swap round because Cheese, my crested gecko, loves bugs way more than she does. She is actually just scared of them. She runs away anytime I put one in the enclosure. Pro number 4 is that I find that these guys are actually a lot more calculated than crested geckos. I do think they are slightly more intelligent. They have 2 brain cells rather than 1, which makes it easier to bond with them and it makes them easier to handle. She is a lot more chilled out, even though she does bite me every now and then, but I can kind of see her thinking about where she's going to go. She doesn't just jump without reason. You know, she's thinking where she's going next, what she's going to land on, which makes it easier to handle her. And pro number 5 is that these guys, again, are a perfect medium-sized gecko. I think that this size here is a good handleable size without being too big or too small. These guys can get slightly bigger than crested geckos sometimes, but as you can see, I mean, Honey is almost fully grown. This is roughly the same size as a Crestie. Now let's get on to the cons. So con number 1, I do think that Gargoyle geckos are less docile than crested geckos. I know that Honey looks great right now, but she definitely has her moments, and it seems to be quite a common theme that these guys can be a little bit more willing to bite than a crested gecko. And I have been bitten. It doesn't really hurt that much, but if you're a new reptile keeper, then you might want to avoid being bitten. You know, being bit by your gecko could put you off. Con number 2 is that these guys tend to get stressed a bit more easily than other geckos. You know, Honey did not want to eat. It took her a long time to settle in compared to my other new cows. And speaking of eating, con number 3 is that these guys do tend to be a little bit pickier with food. I think because they are that little bit more shy, they do tend to go off food quite easily, especially if it's not warm enough. These guys do like it a bit warmer than Cresties. Honey here has her favourite foods, she won't eat anything else. And the last con, like I said, these guys do need higher temperatures, which means that most places, even if you live in a hot country, you will probably need a heat bulb just to get them eating and get their metabolism going. Now, when I say they like it hotter, I'm not talking about 28, 30 degrees. I'm talking about 26. That's about what you want to keep them at. You don't want to go much higher than that, but anything lower, they probably will refuse food. Anyway, Honey's getting a bit peed off at me now, so I'm gonna go pop her away. So, the next gecko is Apple, and Apple is my chameleon gecko. Now, I haven't had her for very long, so if she does start to stress out a bit, I'll probably pop her away, but pro number 1 of these guys is they are by far the easiest New Caledonian gecko to handle. By far. They don't really jump, and they also don't tend to run. When they do walk around, they don't really pick their body up, they just drag it along you. They are essentially a tiny Leachie, and they would rather try and put up a fight by puffing up their body than they would to jump away, like your Cresties and Gargoyles. She is incredibly easy to get her out of her enclosure, and pro number 2 is that because she is small, her enclosure is small too. So if you truly are pressed for space, chameleon geckos are going to make a great addition to your house or your reptile room because they don't take up a lot of real estate. Now, obviously, the bigger, the better. These guys will utilize any space that you do give them, and they'll even use that space during the day, which brings me on to pro number 3, is that these guys are a lot more diurnal than Cresties and Gargoyles. Apple is kind of awake during the day. I'll see her moving around her enclosure. Sometimes she'll go and have a snack, but she's also awake at night. They are the best of both worlds. I find that during the afternoon, she'll come out, she'll bask under her UVB, then she'll go back to sleep. And then the same in the evening. When the lights first turn off, she'll wake up, she'll go have a snack, and then she'll go back to bed. So there are 2 periods of time where she is awake that I am also awake, which is fantastic. And it means that I really get to appreciate her. And speaking of unique, not a lot of people have actually heard of chameleon geckos or know what they are. So if you are wanting to go for something out of the norm or a little bit different, then this is the species for you. And pro number 5 is that these guys, in my experience so far, are not picky with their food. She will eat just about anything. In fact, when I brought her home, she immediately started eating, which is exactly what you want from a gecko. Apparently, the females are more likely to and want to eat bugs, whereas the males generally do refuse them. But don't get a male chameleon gecko just because you don't want to feed bugs. it's nice to still offer them that variety. So now let's get on to the cons. I would say the main con about this species is their size. I mean, I love how cute and tiny she is, but when I am handling her, she does feel quite delicate and quite fragile, and I do kind of have that fear of hurting her sometimes. They aren't necessarily a gecko that I want to just scoop up and grab because of how small they are. So what I do is I just let her walk from hand to hand, like you can see here. Another con is that these guys generally are a bit more sensitive to husbandry mistakes. If they are your first reptile, please, please, please do lots of research and set up the enclosure a few weeks before you get them, just so you know that you can maintain humidity and temperatures where they need to be. Because they are so small, they aren't going to handle temperature or humidity mistakes as well as, let's say, a Crestie would. Con number 3 is if you're looking for a morph, they don't really exist. These guys are so unique and not very readily available that they don't come in morphs. You don't have any fancy color patterns, but I don't really mind that. That's not really a big deal to me because look at her, she's green, she's adorable. You can't get better than a bright green gecko. Another thing that I've found, which is con number 4, is that these guys are actually food motivated. They really will chase down a bug, and she has caught my fingers a couple times because she thought I was a bug when I was trying to clean or change out her food bowl. So that's just something to be aware of. These guys love their food. And con number 5, they are so expensive. They are very, very expensive. I mean, I got her for a pretty good price, but if you were wanting to keep a pair, because you can keep males and females together, then you're looking at about £500 for a breeding pair. And I also just want to preface, yes, you can keep males and females together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should, and you are the right person to do it. Only put males and females together if you are wanting baby chameleon geckos. If not, just keep a lone female or a lone male. But yeah, I love these guys. They make fantastic little pets. I am so happy with Apple, and she may even very well be my most recommended on this list. But let's pop her away and we are going to get onto the last gecko on this list. Now, I don't keep this species, but Catty's Reptiles from Team Educate Don't Berate does, so she's going to help me out with some of the pros and cons of Leachianus geckos. Catty owns Turtle, who is absolutely adorable, and she has given me some things that she loves about them, but also some things that might be a little bit inconvenient. So let's start with the pros. Pro number 1 is they are an amazing size to handle. And in fact, Catty has done choice-based handling with Turtle, which means that most nights she can put her hand in and he will walk right on out. They are a more intelligent gecko compared to most, so you can earn their trust quite a bit more than other species on this list. Pro number 2 is that Leachianus geckos have very unique behavior. They will vocalize with each other, and they are even monogamous. In the wild, these geckos will be solitary for most of the year, but during breeding season, they will come together with the same mate every time, and they will both protect their eggs together. I honestly find that so interesting about these guys. Now, does that mean you should keep 2 together? Probably not. I don't really think it is for everyone, and you should be highly experienced before putting 2 Leachies together, just because the females can reject the males, and them rejecting them is not just telling them to go find somewhere else to live, they will kill them. But once they do pair up, you can watch a beautiful little relationship between the 2 of them. Pro number 3 is that if these guys drop their tails, which they are very, very reluctant to do so, then they will grow it back, just like gargoyles and chameleon geckos. But for me personally, Leachy tails are super small, so if they were to drop them, I feel like from a human perspective, where we feel really bad for them, you know, missing that body part, I don't think it's as big of a deal as it would be like to a crested gecko. So crested geckos, you know, their tail is like the same length of their body and they will use it to climb. But Leachies, it's a tiny tail. It doesn't really have much use. And pro number 5, just like all the other geckos on this list, because they need high humidity, I find bioactive enclosures quite easy. I find it easier to keep a humid setup thriving than I do an arid setup. And because they need so much space, you could really make their enclosure a centerpiece in your house. You could really truly make something quite beautiful if you put in all of those live plants and branches and cork bark. But that brings me on to the cons, because Catty said that Turtle loves to rearrange his enclosure. You put a bridge in or a branch in, it's been knocked down. You put a cute feeding ledge in, it's been knocked down. We can't forget how big these geckos are. They're the biggest geckos in the world and they're very heavy. So just make sure everything is secured down well. Con number 2, talking about vocalizing again, Catty said that Turtle can keep her up at night because of how loud he can be. None of my geckos make any noise unless they are, really stressed out, which is very rarely. But I am used to having White's tree frogs, which are incredibly loud. So I know how annoying it can be when you're trying to fall asleep and you've got squeaking going on in the background. Also, these geckos eat a lot. A big gecko needs a lot of food, and a lot of food means a lot of poop. And specifically on the glass, why do geckos always do that? They just have to choose the front panel to poop on. So you might be doing a lot more spot cleaning than the other geckos, just because they've got a bigger poop. Also, something to consider is everything is bigger about them, including their jaws and their bite force. If you get bitten by a New Caledonian gecko, it is not going to be fun. Now, Catty has worked so hard with Turtle to get him to a point, where he will just walk on out onto her hand, but not all Leachies are going to be like that, specifically females during breeding season, because they will lay infertile eggs and look after those eggs. They can be a little bit more defensive and a bit more territorial with you, and if they do bite you, it would really hurt. And then the last point about Leachianus geckos, for Catty is a pro, and for me is a pro because I want a gecko for ages. But it could also be a con for some, and that is their lifespan. I think the oldest recorded was 80 years old. They can live a very, very long time. Like, this is a huge commitment when taking on a Leachianus gecko, which is why I don't have one yet. I don't know if I'm ready to make that commitment just yet. So just bear that in mind, that you could have a wonderful, lovely gecko for the next 40, 50 years, or you could be dealing with a grouchy one for the next 40 to 50 years. But yeah, that is everything for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below what your gecko's name is, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.